Should reach topic number 3 for time's sake as well. Good discussion, everyone. Chat, let's get some more comments so we can respond to those. Should reach topic number 3 tonight. Says the CIA believes that Nigeria could become a failed state by the 2030s. Is this hyperinflation a sign of things to come? And how could this affect the rest of the continent? This came with a link that's going to take us to YouTube. We'll watch and then we'll discuss.
When you fly into any country, one of the first things you do is to exchange currencies at the forex bureaus. But here in Nigeria, the go-to is the black markets.
Why you have a thriving, I prefer to call it power market. And I say black market, looks like this is something evil, when you call it that way. Is the fact that you have a lot of exchange controls in Nigeria.
Yeah, every day, every time the naira is coming down, while dollar is going up, all the currencies are going up. So why will you keep the naira?
In 2015, you got $1,000 and you had 165,000 naira. Fast forward 8 years later, I need 876,000 if I'm going to buy that, right? So when people see their store of wealth drop aggressively in that manner, more and more people say, I need to move to dollars. I don't trust the naira. I think we've been raped by politicians, ravaged by politicians in the past, or by people who have run the country. The economy has been mismanaged. And the solution is to start to get some foreign currency exposure rather than keeping everything in the naira.
Ending the subsidy and the preferential exchange rate system were key to this fight. This fight is to define the fate and future of our nation. Much is in balance.
Market prices of household items in recent times in Nigeria have spiked, and this is very much connected to the introduction of new monetary policy and the removal of fuel subsidy, which has now tripled the cost of fuel.
The fuel subsidy is sincerely affecting us. Students are finding it so difficult to sustain. Students are finding it so difficult to transport. Students are finding it so difficult to exist in our own country.
There is no market at all. The profit is not there again. We are suffering for everything. I can't lie for you.
Formerly, I used 1,200 naira to buy gasoline. Presently, I spend over 7,500 every day on gasoline. Pathetic. A difficult situation at a time of people that need help. Nigeria need help.
Fuel price go up by about 200%. And you'd have noticed of recent that a lot more people trekking on the roads. People are struggling to pay for transport. Transporters have increased the price of commutes by, say, about 100%. Not everybody can afford it, and not every business can afford to increase wages.
And that is the problem. It's so difficult for someone to sustain a good job. You don't get a job. For you to get a job is a big problem. They'll tell you, who do you know? That the world is about who you know. And we don't know anybody. We, the common people, find it very difficult to sustain a good job. The salary remains same. If you think about it, someone that is earning 30,000 naira before is still earning 30,000 now. Why the 30,000 naira is not enough for you to transport, talk about feeding yourself and your family? People are pained. It's not really funny anymore. It's not really funny. I lack words to actually express the way I feel right now. I don't know. It's annoying. It's annoying. It's so painful.
The minimum wage in Nigeria today is 30,000 naira, and this is less than $40. Labor unions are clamoring for an increase to 200,000, which is about $250.
We've had them propose an increase of minimum wage from 40,000 to about 200,000. I think that's going to be crazy because, first of all, the government can't afford 200,000 as minimum. And second, if you also consider the fact that that will lead to huge inflationary pressure. If you suddenly have 160,000 extra chasing goods and services, inflation will jump. And as inflation moves up, those same people are going to come back and realize that they've only shot themselves in the foot with such a huge increase. So should there be an increase? Yes, definitely. But I don't subscribe to an almost 300-400% increase in wages to sort of alleviate, because it will create a bigger problem for the government as a whole.
If you had the power to, change all of this or effect change, what is that thing you would change in this your sector?
It's like some few people are carrying all the dollars in Nigeria. There's no more dollar in Nigeria. I will just take action on that first. Understand? So people to be hiding money in dollars, all this and all that. That's the first action I'm going to take on it. Seriously.
Who do you think are the people hiding the dollars?
So I can't actually say, but I know there is no dollar anywhere in Nigeria. Even me now, if I have money, I would buy it and decide. Yeah, that's how the country is. Yes.
Very interesting conversation there. Very interesting. Should be topic number 3. The CIA believes that Nigeria could become a failed state by the 2030s. Is this hyperinflation a sign of things to come? And how could this affect the rest of the continent? Let me start with Buana this time. Buana, what are your thoughts here?
Well, whenever you start a statement with the CIA believes, understand it's a statement that you really need to question. Understand that, first and foremost. Second of all, I don't think the whole idea of the so called black market as a bad thing, because the so called formal market, the formal institutions that was built in Nigeria and all these colonized countries do not work in black countries. These are economies and remedies for the society created in the UK, France, and Spain. France and Spain and all these other European colonial countries are not Africa. So it doesn't work the same way. When they put sanctions on Mugabe in Zimbabwe, when they put sanctions on him, people was trying to, wonder, well, how would this country survive without with hyperinflation? Well, Zimbabwe is an old country. How was the people surviving before the colonizers came to Zimbabwe? That's a question nobody wants to answer. So you put all these people in the metropolitan area called Nigeria, all these people, right, in Lagos, and you want them to function normally in normal society. That's abnormal. That's abnormal to have millions and millions of people in a very small confined space, all of them trying to chase this cheese with very few people is able to accomplish in can. Nigeria produces oil. It produces oil just like Saudi Arabia. There's no reason this country should be existing in the way that it exists. So obviously, there are things happening in the formal economy would leave a whole lot of people out of the equation. Therefore, they need to function. Since they've been left out of the equation, they need to function in a way that they could provide for their families and feed themselves. And the Europeans call that black market economy. Well, the you have to work outside of the system. If the system is not working, that's just a eventuality. That's just eventuality because the African man has not decided, well, we're going to create a system conducive for ourselves. They still clinging and holding on to a system, a colonial system that obviously doesn't work. And then on the top of that, you have a person named Tinubu, who's a former gangster. For all intents and purposes, the African man needs to sit down and decide the economy for himself and the kind of economy that is workable for the people who he currently governing over. There is a documentary, not a documentary, there's a news report online where the Burkina Faso, that's been in the media a whole lot. Burkina Faso used to sell uranium, something they used to keep France light on. They used to sell it to them at 30 pence. I think 30 pence per gallon or pound or however it was. That wasn't the world price. The world price for uranium was 200 per gallon, per however they structure it. 200 pounds. 200 pounds. Now, since the coup, the new African government, the new African guys decided to take the price of uranium from 30 pence to $20 per pound, per gallon, or however they gauge it. 220. So that's a little bit beyond the world market. Now you're going to see a proper market price for the people in Burkina Faso. So see how that will eventually affect the lives of the people who actually live there. But when you when you have a system in place, this unorthodox system, whether it's a French system in Africa or whether it's a colonial English system in Africa, there are going to be shortfalls because there are going to be unfairness across the board, where a few people gain the benefit of that system, and then the millions and millions of people who are left out in the dark. You have to function that way. You have no choice in the matter if you want to provide and feed for your kids. So now these African guys exert themselves in Burkina Faso and say, no. If you want our Ukrainium, you have to pay world market prices for it. So you will see the benefit coming into the country, and it's touching the lives of more than just a few people in government. Well, Nigeria has not taken that turn yet, but eventually, if these things continue to happen, where you see these shortfalls and the people scrambling for bread every day, then these leaders must go. You must create an economy that is conducive for the people who actually exist in Nigeria, not for the corporations in Europe, not for the governments in Europe, but the people on the ground that exist in Nigeria and other African countries and Caribbean countries, for a matter of fact. But this is not really hit the minds of these people who live in Banana Island and who live these opulent Western lives and lifestyles or whatever. But you can continue to see the same so-called black market economy. People are going to find another alternative way. And if they say it's a failed state, who says it's the CIA? Of course it's a failed state because it's not beneficial to them. But for the Nigerians who making money off of this so-called black market economy, they gonna be able to put bread in their bellies, in their stomachs, and survive. Because I always say that when people talk about inflation and all these other things, and our economy gonna be messed up and all these things, I ask the question: what were the people in Africa doing to feed and support themselves prior to the colonialists coming? Obviously, they was able to find and work out a way. And if we have to go back to that narrative forcefully, where you have these coups all around Africa, so be it. But I'll leave it there.
Appreciate that, Buana. Azuli, what say you?
To me, that sounds like predictive prophecy. Feels like they'll do something with the corrupt people in Nigeria. As in Nigeria produces a lot of oil, and they said it's going to be a failed state. That's predictive. Well, they're not predictive. What is it? Creating prophecy that they put it out there. So when it happens, then you'll never say that, oh, we didn't say it. So again, you got to look at, isn't the CIA supposed to be minding America's business? Why mining America's interest? So I guess that's what they're doing over there. So I don't know. That's not like predictive prophecy to me, that they already putting it out there and stuff. And the other thing is the corruption. If it's gonna be a failed state, it's because of the corruption. The people there who are selling their country out so they could send their children to Oxford. That's where the corruption is coming. I don't understand how Nigeria has all this oil, just like Buana said, like Saudi Arabia, and they're still at the stage, at the level they're at. So I don't know, man.
Thank you for that, Azuli. And finally, Black Steel, what say you to all of that you've heard?
So I put the report in the Discord, This is what it says here. It says a state fails when it suffers the loss of physical control of its territory, its monopoly on the legitimate use of force, the erosion of its legitimate authority to make collective decisions, an inability to provide reasonable public services, the inability to interact with other states as a full member of the international community. So what Azuli was saying about the corruption is very important because Nigeria is an oil producing country, but most of the wealth that it produces, number one, it funds the oligarchs, the richest members of the society, and number two, the mining of that oil it's an ecological disaster because Nigeria doesn't have the tight controls that a lot of like the US or Saudi Arabia. So there's a lot of pollution from that oil within the Niger Delta, which is which is polluting the underground water sources, killing off the fish in the Gulf of Guinea, the clear cutting of the rainforest to get more access to the oil. So just having the oil wealth is not necessarily a good thing because this oil comes with a price. But yeah, they're saying part of the reason that their idea that Nigeria could fail is part of the corruption, and also because it's the largest nation in Africa, and if the nation goes under, it could take much of the surrounding area with them as far as their, into like basically like a collapse on itself. Kind of like what happened in Somalia when Somalia went under back in the 90s. But yeah, so I'm looking at the report right now. They're saying that as far as what the corruption is one, the lack of mobility in the population, and also Nigeria being the largest country in Africa as far as the population, you also have to deal with the different fragmentation of ethnic groups. So you have half the country's Muslim, another part of the country's Christian. You have those people who believe in traditional African religion. You have multiple ethnic groups in the country. All of these could lead to a possible explosion if the nation is not able to respond properly. This country has had 5 coups since the 1960s. So first of all, Nigeria doesn't need to go to war with anybody. They're talking about KWAZ invading not Mali, dang. Chad. Chad. So that's not gonna happen. If it happens, Nigeria already dealing with this Tinubu guy who's a gangster. If they invade this country, I'm sorry, invade Niger, because they don't want to bow to the French anymore. The people in the video, they're saying the Naira is now at a point to where their daily needs aren't met. Where they're getting paid 40 Naira, they're basically equivalent of $40 a month is what the average Nigerian makes. This puts into mind a historical situation, what happened in Germany at the end of the First World War, where Germany was hit with hyperinflation, where you couldn't buy food, you couldn't buy firewood, and Germany turned to fascism to solve their problems. I don't think that Nigeria is going to go that way, but I do think a collapse in the government is going to impact the rest of the continent in ways that might not be positive. They don't need to be invading anybody. They need to clean their own house. But I do think that we kind of, and I'm not saying because I necessarily believe the CIA, but I do understand that the Central Intelligence Agency is focused on protecting American interests. And it's in America's interest that they continue to have access to Nigeria's crude oil to make plastics from, to make gasoline from. It is in American interest to have access to these resources. A failed state, it would make their job that much harder. So I'll leave it there.
I appreciate that, Carl. Anyone want to add any last thoughts before we move on to the next prompt? All right, thanks, Carl, for that breakdown too. of the entire situation. Much appreciated.